Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a steampunk dress, and this will be part 1 where I show you how to make the jacket. It's definitely been a work in progress since it's my first one post baby, and I'm excited that I can actually try this dress on. Needless to say, I love it. I love steampunk, and I can't wait to get a chance to actually wear this dress out. Once again, I ended up making this dress out of woven cotton, so I pre-washed all my fabrics, and I was even more excited to use some really cool buttons that I've had laying around for a very long time. I'm making the jacket with the McCall's 7071 pattern, and other than the things that the pattern requires, it will be just basic sewing notions for this project. And I will be making my jacket in a size 18. I am going to be doing view A. Go ahead and start cutting out all your pieces from your fabric, your lining or contrast fabric, and your interfacing. Once all your pieces are cut out, you're going to mark all your dots and your notches, as well as any other specialty markings that the pattern specifies, like fold lines. We're going to go to our front bodice pieces first, and we're going to add the darts. I will take my sewing pin and go through the first bottom dot and connect it through the second bottom dot. I'm going to pinch the top dot, and this is how I will pin it together. Go ahead and do this to the other dart on the second front bodice piece and the 2 on the back bodice piece. Then we're going to sew this, connecting the top dot all the way down to the bottom dot on all 4 darts. Once these are sewn, go ahead and fold over the fabric from your dart toward the centers and iron them down in place. With right sides together, lay your front and back bodice pieces together, matching the shoulders and the sides, and pin these together. Sew these with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Go ahead and iron open these seams so that everything lays nice and flat. And then you're going to do the same exact thing with the lining pieces. With right sides together, match up your fabric and lining bodice, making sure to match them at the seams and edges all around the neckline. Go ahead and pin the neckline together. And we're going to sew this together with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Take your scissors and we're going to put some small clips into the seam allowance all around the curves, and this will help your curves lay nicely when we turn it out later. Make sure not to cut past the thread. We're going to open this up. We're going to pin down the seam allowance to the lining. And then we're going to top stitch the seam allowance down with the 1/8 inch seam allowance all the way along the neckline. Making sure that your bodice is still right sides together, we're also going to match those small sides and pin those together. Go ahead and sew these 2 with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Take your scissors and cut off some of that excess fabric at the corners, and this will also help your corners turn out nicely. Then go ahead and turn your bodice right side out. You can use a pencil or chopstick to help you poke out those corners. Going to your armholes, once again you're going to match up the seam allowances and all the dots and notches and pin those together on both sides. And then you're also going to go to the bottom of the bodice and match up all those seams and notches, pinning that together as well. We're going to baste stitch the armholes and the bottom with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once that's all sewn together, we can go ahead and press the neckline so everything's nice and neat and stays in place. Grabbing our front and back waistband pieces, we are going to add the inner facing to 1 back piece and 2 front pieces. Then you can iron these on. With your inner facing pieces, you're going to line up the sides of the front pieces with the sides of the back waistband with right sides together. And you can pin these together. And do the same thing with the second set of waistband pieces. Sew these sides together with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then grab your iron and press open the seams. With right side face up, match up the longer curved side of your waistband with the bottom of your bodice. And you will also match the seams and the notches together. Sew this with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Taking your waistband without the inner facing, on the shorter curved side of the waistband, you're going to fold it up 5/8 inches and iron it down all the way across. Turn your bodice so the lining is face up, and once again you're going to match that long curved edge of your waistband to that bottom edge, matching the same points and pinning it together. Go ahead and cut off half of that seam allowance of the fold that we ironed down. And then sew this on with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once again, we're going to cut off half of the seam allowance from the sides and the bottom edge. Pull the waistband down, making sure that everything's tucked out nice and neat, and then we're going to iron this in place as well, all the way across. Moving on to our sleeves next. We're going to fold these right sides together, matching those long edges. Then you can pin up these sides. And you're going to do this to all 4 sleeves. Sew these sides with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. And then we will open up the seams and iron them in place. Turn your lining sleeves right side out. And then match the notches at the top of the sleeves so you know which ones go together. And you're going to place the lining inside of your fabric sleeve. Match up the bottom of your sleeves with the seam and pin this together on both sides. And we're going to sew these with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. From here we're going to cut off half of the seam allowance again. open out the lining. And we're going to top stitch this down with the 1/8 inch seam allowance, making sure that the seam allowance is facing toward the lining. This will be a little tight on your sewing machine, so just take your time sewing little small sections at a time. Turn your lining right side out once again, and then you can turn your sleeves right side out as well. Make sure the top of your sleeves match up nicely, matching the seams, notches, and the small dots. And we will baste stitch the top edge with the 5/8 inch seam allowance to hold everything in place. From one outside small dot to the other outside small dot, we're going to do a gathering baste stitch on both sleeves. Start with about a 3 or 4 inch tail of thread, and using your longest stitch, we're going to do a 1/8 inch seam allowance first. Make sure to leave a tail of thread at the end as well. And then we're going to do the same thing at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Grab your top 2 threads and you're going to pull these firmly but gently, and this will start to gather up the top of your sleeve. Put in a few gathers. And then grab your bodice, making it inside out. You're going to match the notches on the sleeve with the notches in the armhole. Start by matching the bottom seam allowance, the notches, and the small dots. Then pull up your gathers till it fits perfectly into the armhole. Then move around your gathers so that they are evenly distributed, and then you can pin the top in place. Do this to the other side as well. We're going to baste stitch these together at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to take our sleeve head pieces with wrong side face up, and we're going to match this up with our knit interfacing pieces. You want to make sure the glue side is down toward the fabric. And then we're going to iron these on, ironing over the fabric side and not the interfacing side. Fold your piece in half lengthwise, and then lightly press this in half. We're once again going to do a gathering baste stitch along the curve from one outside dot to the other. Gather these up, and then opening up the inside of your sleeve, you're going to match the small dots on the outside with the small dots in the sleeve. Once again, you're going to pull up your gathers till this fits nice and neat in between. And then you will distribute the gathers evenly, pin this all in place, and do the same thing to the other side. Sew these in with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to serge this inside edge of my sleeve so it doesn't come undone, but you can also do a zigzag stitch and trim it closely down to the stitch to keep it from fraying. So this should be our bodice so far. Take your back peplum pieces and open it up. And we're going to lay these right sides together, meeting that center back seam. And then take a pin and you're going to mark where you have the small dot, which should be about 5 or 6 inches down from the top. Then pin up the top opening. Take your front peplum pieces And then line up the sides of these pieces with the sides of your back pieces and pin these together as well with right sides together. Sew these sides down with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and the little bit that you've pinned in the back. Iron open your seams. And once again, you're going to do the same thing with your lining pieces. Lay your lining and fabric pieces together with right sides together, matching up your seams. And then you're going to pin all along the bottom edge. Sew this whole bottom edge with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Grab your scissors and cut off half of this seam allowance. And just like before, you're gonna open this and lay your seam allowance towards your lining so we can do a 1/8 inch top stitch all the way around and as best as you can going toward the inside corners. Turn this right side out and you can use a pencil or chopstick to poke out those points again. And you're gonna lay this edge out nice and neat so that we can iron and press it in place. Going to the top edge, we're going to baste stitch it close with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. To make our pleats, starting with the inner pleat, you're going to bring those outside dots to match up to the inside dots. So I'm going to make a fold on the outside dots and bring it in, lining it up with those inside dots. And then I'll pin this up at the top. So once again on that second pleat, I'm going to fold it at those two outside dots and bring it in toward the two inside dots, matching them up, and pin the top again. Do this to the other side, going the opposite direction. Doing the same thing, matching the outside to the inside. Baste stitch these down with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Grab your bodice and we're going to line up the edge of our waistband with the raw edge of our peplum, right sides faced together, and you're going to match them up by the seams. Pin this and sew it with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Cut off half of this seam allowance. And then we're going to fold up this seam allowance in toward the waistband. Take your iron and press the seam allowance in place, all the way across. Then you can fold over the other side of your waistband, and the edge of the waistband should match with the thread from your seam allowance. Pin this in place. And then you're going to do a slip stitch or a ladder stitch to close this up. I will leave a video link down below in case you don't know how to do this. Last, going to the front of our bodice, we're going to add our buttons and our buttonholes. And I will leave another video link down below to show you how to do buttonholes with and without a buttonhole foot. And the jacket is complete. I opted out to not include the collar on this pattern, but overall this was an extremely easy pattern to put together. And it's really easy to mix up the different contrasting lining pieces to give it all kinds of different looks. I'm really loving this deep cut of the neckline on this jacket. You can really go many different ways with it. I feel like I will definitely be making this bodice again in the future, Since this neckline is just so versatile, it definitely gives me a lot of inspiration. I also made the blouse for this pattern, and I will leave that video link down below as well. I hope that you found this tutorial helpful. I'm really trying to get back on my game to be more consistent with uploading videos once again. I already have a ton of videos planned, so please subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure you click the bell so that you get notified when I upload. So stick around, I will have part 2 coming soon, which is going to be the skirt. So I hope to see you all again very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye!